Hello, nomads and snowmads. My name is TBS Guy, and Nunu is finally getting a full release from the PPE onto the live servers, which means that a couple of new color stories, he's getting 2 color stories, which is kind of lovely, have been released as well to expand a little bit on his lore, which means we can finally get into a proper deep dive on what his lore and his story even is. And so, we're finally able to ask a question I've been waiting to ask for quite a long time. What is the deal with Nunu? Now, if you want the comparison piece between old Nunu and new Nunu and new Nunu, then that happens in the old versus new video that I did when the new Nunu was first revealed to the PPE. We're not really going to be spending a lot of time on that, like mapping out the changes between the two. We're mostly going to be talking about what is the core fantasy of Nunu and Willump. There we go. That's the better way to say it. And what's the core appeal? What are they really about as characters, and how do their character designs play into that? Because there is something interesting going on with Nunu that really isn't very well represented in League of Legends, something that is quite unique to him, and that is that his fantasy on a very fundamental level is about childish emotionality. Now, here's the thing. Most champions of League of Legends represent some kind of power fantasy, specifically a power fantasy about, I am strong and I can do these things because I have these special superpowers. And that goes for characters like Braum all the way down to characters like Rammus. Like, all of them somewhere represent some kind of power fantasy to do various things. Nunu is interesting because mostly power really isn't at the core of his fantasy. It's not really a fantasy that's about being powerful and doing powerful things. It's much more a fantasy that's about being free and having the freedom to do fun things. And that's the distinction is blurry. It's not like a clear cut. This is a completely different type of thing. Because of course, playing as Nunu and having the snow powers and the ability to use absolute zero and eat things, of course that's part of a power fantasy in some sense. But at the core of Nunu as a character, that really isn't the thing. Like, Nunu is not like a character like Darius, who's like, I am the vanguard of the Empire, and Noxus's ideals must be protected, and you're not like Swain, who's like this string puller in the background. You're not like Azir, who's trying to rebuild an empire. You're not like Nasus, who's trying to sort of shepherd the future of Shurima into something that's more sustainable than its ancient past. You're not really like most of the other champions of League of Legends, because you don't have like a quest that somehow involves overcoming some great power that is aligned against you or anything like that. What Nunu wants, what he wants as a character, and the fantasy that you get to embody when you play as him and when you read his stories, the fantasy you get to experience is one of being a young boy playing in the snow, daydreaming, having fantasies, telling stories, coming up with grand adventures for yourself. And not that his story is completely without tragedy, trying to find your lost mother. Now, mothers. Now, there is a subject that League of Legends could stand to explore a little bit more, because Nunu is specifically a child who was deprived of his mother, taken from her by accident and tragedy. And the reason why he's out adventuring with Willump, the reason why he's out exploring the world, seeing things, doing his own thing, is because he's trying to track down his mom. He still wants to find her. He still clings on to hope that he can, even though he has no idea where she is or if she's even alive anymore. And as for Willump, well, he's kind of mostly just along for the ride because he has grown to have a real affection for the boy, but also because he's come to realize that Nunu and his childish optimism, his hopefulness, his pure heart essentially represents the only real hope for the Freljord, is if people like him are given the power to shape it, rather than the old power structures of the Freljord, the tribes of the Three Sisters, Lysandra and Ashe and Sejuani, all of whom are engaged in a power struggle. Nunu, however, is someone who is in possession of tremendously powerful magic, but who has absolutely no interest in wielding it like a power broker. And that's what makes him interesting and unique. Like, he doesn't want to take over a kingdom. He doesn't want to throw down some evil tyrant from on high. He just wants to have adventures. He wants to have fun. And it's something that you find in plenty of video games, by the way. It's not an unusual fantasy, and it's something that's at the core of a lot of different kinds of stories, especially young adult novels and kids media. But in League of Legends, really, I don't feel like we've seen it that much before, if indeed at all. Because again, League of Legends is a game primarily about power fantasies. It's primarily about being the questing hero or villain out to accomplish some kind of goal through the means of typically violence, typically the use of power. And that's really not very much at the core of Nunu. And this, like, the obvious comparison that I would make for Nunu, and the one that certainly the artists at Riot are not blind to, is to My Neighbor Totoro, which again is a story that, as children's media, and indeed as a children's fantasy story, marks itself out by not being about power at all. Like, it has absolutely no connection to, to having any kind of a power fantasy. My Neighbor Totoro is very specifically about two children, how they relate to the new place that they're living, how they relate to their surroundings, and how they cope with very difficult feelings like their mother being sick and their father being hard at work and unable perhaps to be as attentive to them as they need him to be, and as attentive to the feelings. And specifically it's about how these two sisters come together and blah blah blah. Anyway, that's besides the point. But my point is, My Neighbor Totoro as a film, if you've seen it, then you will understand very much what the power fantasy, or rather the fantasy, like the imaginative fantasy of Nunu is all about. It's about having this big, powerful, but very friendly and kind-hearted friend who helps you just kind of get through your day and do the things that matter to you as a person, and when the time comes, maybe helps you come to terms with some complicated feelings you might have about the mother figure in your life. And this comes across brilliantly in their new character design. Like I said, comparison video is going to be in the description, but for the purposes of just looking at the character design in this video, what we have with Nunu and Willump is characters who, by their very design, embody a kind of equal partnership. This is one of the clever things I didn't get to talk about in the comparison video, is Nunu's hat has the same colors and sort of general expression as Willump. He's wearing a Yeti hat. He's wearing a hat of his, like, that resembles his best friend because, hey, he wants to be like him. In the same way that a child might wear, like, an outfit that their mother sewed to be patterned after their best imaginary friend, is a kind of adorable little childish behavior thing. And that's something that works really, really well, is that the character design, and indeed the way they move, the way they're animated, very much speaks to the two of them as a duo of friends. Not as one character, not as one person directing and riding another, but as companions, as people who are helping each other out on the long road. And that's something that comes across brilliantly, especially in their run animation. I'm trying to talk a little bit more about animation because people have been asking me to. Their general run animation, where Nunu will just, every once in a while, he'll just, like, swing around from Willump's horns, and Willump will, like, catch him and move him along. And also in their combat animations, very much it's the same thing, that whenever physical damage needs to be, like, whenever something needs to be punched in the face, basically that's Willump that takes care of that. But whenever a snowball needs to be thrown, whenever, a little bit of magic needs to help, whenever the blood boil in terms of the mechanical changes to the characters, and again, I won't comment on balance decisions and stuff like that, but the changes to the blood boil are kind of a brilliant little encapsulation of how the changes to Nunu Willump, and by the way, their dance emote is just absolutely, I love this so much. This is such a good dance emote. Because again, it's about, like, Nunu playing a little song on his flute and Willump dancing along. It's brilliant. But specifically the change to the blood boil struck me as an interesting crystallization of the change that has happened to the two characters, because Nunu's new passive is Call of the Freljord. Effectively, it's his old blood boil, right? But take a look at the difference in expression. What happens is when Nunu, and Willump rather, specifically Willump, does a physical attack to an enemy, he gives a buff to whoever happens to be around that inspires and encourages them to fight harder, to do better in battle. And that is a very different thing from the old Nunu, where Blood Boil, where he casts a spell on someone that makes them go berserk, rah, which is like it's kind of an intrusive, almost kind of a slightly cruel act. It's essentially an act of mind control, as it were. But this is a very different thing, where in order to even activate the ability, you have to charge into the front line. You have to be the first one in line for the fight, which ties in with Nunu's characteristics, is that he's an enthusiastic young boy who wants to be at the front, like, who wants to be out there saving people, being heroic, doing the heroic thing. Now, the reason why I don't like to talk about gameplay a lot as it comes to, like, the relationship with the character's lore is that I've spent a lot of time already in this video talking about how Nunu really isn't a power fantasy. He's really not about hurting anyone or about, throwing down some evil tyrant or pursuing some agenda of power. except he is in-game, because that's the only way to play League of Legends, you have to. You have to be a power fantasy in the game. But the Blood Boil struck me as kind of a wonderful microcosm, because it's no longer about raw, fight, do, bear, kill, it's not about, from a mechanical and indeed an aesthetic level, it's no longer about that. It's about being the first one in there. It's about inspiring the people around you. It's about giving them hope for the fight by literally giving them a power buff. Like, he gives them greater hope that they can overcome whatever challenge is in front of them, and that is very much at the core of his story as well. So, the stories that we've got. Is this... Yeah, okay, good. Because it's a short story, which it's actually just his bio. Nunu is a child of the Notai, a race of nomadic wanderers in the Freljord that I don't believe we have been introduced to previously in other lore pieces. Maybe we have, and I'm just not aware of it because it was like a footnote and something, but they haven't been a big deal, essentially, in Freljord lore up until now. And these people are nomads who travel around the Freljord, bringing songs and dances and sort of a cultural connection to the Freljord between the various warring tribes. And they, to a certain extent, revere Anivia, because she represents freedom to them. So, as they say here, riding the wave of frost spilling from Anivia's wings, his heart beating the rhythm of a jubilant song, Nunu's world was full of possibility. They follow Anivia across the Freljord. As she heralds the coming of winter, they come along to the various villages that they get to and play their songs and, bring warmth and hope to the various peoples of the Freljord before moving on. And Nunu gets his magical flute, which is not magical at that point, but nonetheless a flute from his mother, and she teaches him many songs about the Freljord, about the legends of what happened there, and about what life is going to be like, and she encourages him to be imaginative and to think for himself and to imagine, be hopeful about the future and not get bogged down in the wars and the atrocities and the troubles and the turmoil of the otherwise rather bleak Freljordian reality. Nunu is a speck of light and joy in a lore region that has been severely short on them, honestly. So, of course it can't last, because without some kind of conflict you can't have a story, so the caravan is attacked by raiders. Nunu is separated from his mother and dragged to safety by a band of the Frost Guard. Were they just there by accident? Time will tell. He is taken to the Frostguard Citadel, where they don't imprison him so much as they just go, no, you can't go out, it's too dangerous, we're keeping you here. And Lysandra talks to him a lot, asking him very specific questions about some of the songs that his mother taught him, because there's apparently something that she wants to know. Nunu, however, is not content to just sit and wait around. He hears about a fierce monster who kills everybody who comes to seek its power, and he decides that, well, if I can tame that monster, if I can tame that Yeti, because he from his songs and the stories that he's heard from his mother, he understands that this creature is a Yeti. And he thinks that, okay, I could defeat that beast and they'll all know that I'm powerful enough to go out and search for my mother and they're all going to help me. So he imagines this grand adventure for himself, sneaks out, and travels to the lair of the Yeti, which leads us into the story from Willump's perspective. And this is something that's quite interesting about both their bio and their short story Stone Cold. Not so much the other short story, which is Frozen Hearts, which is specifically from Nunu's perspective only, and talks a little bit about his backstory and his relationship to his mom. But in both the short story Stone Cold and the bio, we see the story from two perspectives. We see it from Nunu's perspective, and then we see it from Willump's. And Willump is a very different character. He's like more the traditional League of Legends character. He's more like your Skarner, for example, like here, an ancient and noble race that once ruled over the mountains of the Freljord. The Yeti civilization was destroyed in a cataclysm of ice. This, by the way, was the coming of the Watchers during the time of the Three Sisters, who attacked Runeterra. The Yeti were among the people who responded to that threat, who fought with the various alliances of the Freljord at the Battle of the Howling Abyss, and were frozen and killed for their trouble by the magic of Lysandra when she sealed away the Watchers and began, the long wait for them to thaw their way out of the True Eyes and once again invade the physical realm. Anyway, the Yeti civilization was destroyed by this. At least I'm reasonably sure that it's the Void conflict that's at the source of that. It's never really confirmed, but that's my assumption. The Yeti civilization was destroyed, stripped of their magical power by what happened, and they descended into savagery. And all that remains of the magical power of the Yeti is contained in a single gem. Now, there's been some lore theories out in the community that the gem in question in this story is a world rune. This is not confirmed. Like, this is not really necessarily true. It could be a world rune. It's not really known, but it doesn't behave in the same corruptive way that other world runes do, and Nunu and Willump seem able to control it, which nobody else has ever been able to control a world rune properly, at least according to Rise's lore. So I have some doubts about that. I think it might just be the condensation of all the remaining magical power in the Yeti race, which Willump guards in his citadel. And the only people who come to search for him, the only people who come to find him in his vigil, have darkness in their heart. These are the warriors of the Frostguard who Lysandra have been sending out to find the last Yeti, to seize that bit of the Yeti's power for herself, presumably to use in order to further delay the Watchers from breaking through the Howling Abyss, because that seems to be her primary motivation nowadays, is just to delay that from happening as much as possible so that she can survive. So he is only ever met with hostility and violence from these people, and so he becomes hostile and violent, and he's forgetting things. Like, the personality that he once was is slipping away. And then Nunu comes along. And Nunu just charges in with no notion that he's facing some kind of dangerous monster, and with no sense that he's going to be seizing any power or grabbing any sort of gains for himself. He's not really there with selfish motivations. And so Willump reacts to that, because he has that old magic of the Yeti that allows him to see into the dreams and the hearts of the people around him. And he realizes, hang on, this kid doesn't want to hurt anyone. He wants to be a hero. He just wants to be hopeful. He wants to find his mother. And so instead of having a fight, they have a snowball fight. And they play around, and as Nunu's influence begins to affect Willump, he becomes softer and kinder, and he becomes less monstrous. He becomes, a friend, and then he breaks Nunu's flute by accident. And in that grief, in that moment, Willump understands that the only thing Nunu wants is to find his mother. The only thing that really motivates him is love, as it says, fighting back despair. And in that moment, Willump decides that, you know what? That's a good way to use power. In fact, that might be the only damn hope for the Freljord, if someone who's not concerned with power, but who's concerned with love, with kindness, with hope, with adventure, with just bringing goodness into the world, has this power. And so he gives it to Nunu and decides to join him as a companion. And at that moment, they become friends. And as it says, the Guardian knew the Freljord's only hope lay in the power already within this child. The magic he'd been guarding was only a tool. What truly mattered was the heart that would shape it. With a gesture, the magic passed from the gem into the boy, giving him the ability to make his imagination real. To repair his flute, freezing it in dreams that hardened into true ice. To imagine a best friend named Willump. And this is the core of their dynamic. Nunu, as a child, is always ever focused on the adventure right in front of us. Yes, he wants to find his mother, but more than that, he's a kid. Like, he wants to have the adventure that's in front of him. He's playing with his friend. He's seeing the world. He's exploring. He's doing the things that children do. But Willump, being much older, more ancient, and in some ways, the brains of the group, knows those dark secrets that are hiding below the surface of the Freljord. He knows the things that Nunu will eventually have to come to realize and have to deal with, but he also knows that Nunu is a child, and that childish hope represents the only hope for both his people, the Yeti, he's given their power to Nunu. It represents the only hope for the Freljord. The only hope for a responsible use of power lies within power that's motivated by love. Which is, again, what an unusual sentiment for League of Legends. How many other characters in League of Legends are, explicitly motivated by love? The only one that comes to mind for me is Taric, and he's still all tied up in the whole protector of the stars, grand space adventures of Targon thing. He's really not a down-to-earth character. Motivated by love. That's kind of a powerful sentiment, and a highly unusual one for League of Legends. Second short story, Stone Cold, has a little bit of a similar structure. We start by seeing things from Nunu's perspective, and then we switch over to Willump, who kind of takes the broader, more advanced view of the events as they're unfolding. In this story, Nunu hears the song of his mother in his dreams. Like the song that he's been chasing, like the song that he remembers from his childhood, the song that's been guiding him all across the Freljord and telling him, well, giving him some ideas at least of what to do. He's chasing that song as he's looking for his mother. And Willump, well, is, at least as far as Nunu is concerned, is mostly just along for the ride as a friend. They find a village that has been cursed. Everybody there has been turned to stone. And, well, it's not a great scene, and Nunu can't cure the curse. He can't help them. But he tries. He finds that some Krugs have made a nest above a waterfall, which is a little bit of a problem for the village because it's all been frozen over and life has kind of deserted the village. And even though Nunu can't help the people necessarily, he's not really intimidated by the curse. Here we get some insight into how Willump thinks of Nunu. I can smell the curse, a hateful stench like a troll. It has the weight of centuries, weight that would grind the years this child has left down to mere days. Here is where even heroes of song would question how they could fight, powerless against ancient magic. But Nunu is no mere hero. He's something better. He's a boy. Which is, I hear, take to mean child and not specifically male boy. I don't know, that's the whole thing. Krugs have taken up a nest holding back the water's flow, holding back a waterfall, which is kind of the lifeblood of the Freljord. And so Nunu and Willump resolve to clear out the Krugs and restore the waterfall, which doesn't cure the curse by any means, but it restores some semblance of hope to the world. It restores a balance to the world. It restores life to this village, even if it can't bring back the villagers who were taken. It restores hope, which touches Nunu so much that he actually cries. Touches Willump so much that he actually cries because, again, as an ancient Yeti who has spent like several hundred years mostly just killing people who came to steal his magic, kind of a big deal for him. And as a result of them managing to help this village even in a small way, they both hear the song of Nunu's mother predicting, in a strange way, their actions in the village. Where waters once roared, winds whisper to stone. In shadow, Nalja Egg lies, silence sings, hope survives. So, insofar as I can make out at least, this is implying that the journey that they're taking across the Freljord is following the predictions and the stories that were laid down in Nunu's mother's song, even if he can't necessarily quite remember what the song is. He follows that emotional beat of those songs around the Freljord, taking on, whatever quests need taking on, saving people when he can, helping out, and just being a child and having fun, but also chasing the memory of his mother. How exactly that's all going to work out in the end, I'm quite curious to see. Frozen Hearts is a bit of a different story. This is primarily a story that's meant to give some characterization to Nunu's mother, who so far in the lore that's been provided, she's not really been a character. She's just kind of been, his mother who he loves, and then she's gone, and we never see her again. This gives somewhat more personality to her. And by the way, from an aesthetic standpoint, Nunu and his mother, at least in this piece of concept artwork, and this down here, seem to be patterned after various First Nations people from the northern part of the world. Now, they have many different names. Inuit is one of them. You have to be kind of careful about how you use them specifically because a lot of people have kind of... They suffer from some stereotypes, let's put it like that. They seem to be patterned after various types of First Nations people out here in our real world, which is really interesting because, again, that is something that's really rare to see in League of Legends, and the Freljord so far mostly has been inspired by various Viking aesthetics and like a whole lot of sort of like very heavy brutalist architecture and stuff like that. Big rocks piled on top of other rocks, and not a lot of the sort of hunter-gatherer cultures that otherwise tend to dominate, to the nomadic cultures that tend to actually be the people who have lived in the northern parts of the world, at least insofar as I know. So I'd say like they pattern somewhat after the Sami in northern Finland, perhaps somewhat around the indigenous cultures of places like Greenland. But I'm not an expert on this, so like if someone knows more than me about the aesthetics of those particular cultures and can actually evaluate from the artwork that we have, which ones they seem to be patterned around, please leave a comment down below, because I'd be really interested to know. This is a subject where I don't have a ton of knowledge, and I'd love to know more. Anyway, the story here is primarily Nunu and his mother just having a nice time together. They're traveling, and they're hanging out, and they're talking, and they're making jokes with each other, and Nunu's mother is telling him about, like, teaching him about the world, essentially. And Nunu, being a young boy, is very enamored with stories of, heroes and the war mothers and the barbarians having their great battles all across the world, and his mother is cautioning him that those things aren't really the important parts of life. What's important, and she frames this in a characterization of Anivia. They say she is a phoenix with icicles instead of feathers, her wings borne on frigid wind. But we know it is hope that carries Anivia. That she's not a guardian of our realm, as the Everosans say. She's freedom. She's a spirit that fills you as you follow your passion, no matter how mean the world is. Do you know what passion is, Nunu? Is it when the barbarian kisses the war mother? Sometimes. And sometimes the war mother kisses the barbarian. But if I had to name it, I would call passion the feeling of one last celebration as winter hits. The warmth inside even better because the first snows are falling. The dancing, the singing, a lyre in my hands shivering even as I burn with this thing I try to name. This is what Anivia has tasked us with carrying across the Freljord. This is what gives her wind on her migration. Some villagers see us as untrustworthy traders, others fear us for the ice that announces our arrival, the winter that can mean life or death. But to them all we bring song, we bring togetherness, we link each village with our spirit. Can you imagine what a gift this is, Nunu? To know what we know, because caravan carts had rattled it into our bones, life is an endless string of opportunity for songs. Which says a lot about the fundamental attitude of the Notai as a people, but also about the fundamental moral code that guides Nunu as a character. It's not about winning the Great War. It's not about, even as Ash and the Everosans, who traditionally should have been the good guys of the Freljord, it's not really about uniting the tribes in some kind of grand unified polity and where everybody's working together for the same goal. It's about finding cultural togetherness. It's about finding, a commonality in love where you don't all have to be the same. You don't all have to be the part of the same tribe, but all of you at least can, enjoy the same songs. You can dance to the same tunes. You can feel the warmth of a nice fire and the weight of a good meal in your tummy and be happy for a time. To have hope, to have passion, to have freedom together. The song that binds them together, like this. This is the sound of chains tying wolf ships to Glazaport and the Winter's Claw to the past. The old ways, blood in the snow. They live their lives on shattered ice. They think it is their might that cracks a path to the sea. The wolf ships prowling through. But it is not strong to cling to chains and to demand that others carry them. Like, she pretty much just gives a smackdown to each of the 3 tribes of the Freljord who believe that they have found the true path to what ties the Freljord together. And she says, no, it's not any of these individual things that form the heart of the Freljord. The heart of the Freljord is all of them together as people, And that's a very different attitude, and that's something that's very interesting as a way to express the character, that if this is his quest, like, this is the thing that he's ultimately going to end up doing as he follows his mother's song across the Freljord, is he's gonna bring hope. He's gonna bring passion. He's gonna bring freedom to people. And this is the power that Willump saw in him, the power to imagine something more than might through military conquest, something more than just imposing the ideals of any one tribe over all of the others, something more than all of these, ties, all of these buildings and monuments and structures binding people to the past with no hope of seeing a future without them. And all of this is very interesting. Like, it's unique. There really isn't a lot of other champions in League of Legends, or indeed in video games, really, that have that thing at their core, like this very sort of innocent wish of togetherness and hope and just laughing and joy and dance and song and good times with friends. Like, it's a powerful imaginary idea, I think. Like, it's a really powerful fantasy to embody, but it's one that's hard to translate into the kind of stuff we expect from video game gameplay, where you have to feel like a badass, you have to get powerful, you have to feel strong, you have to get pentakills, which is really not what Nunu is about as a character. Like, the way he's characterized in the lore, and this is again the ludonarrative dissonance that's always going to exist in a game like League of Legends versus the writing of League of Legends, is most of what Nunu cares about canonically, he does not give a single shit about in-game. He's not really about bringing hope to people, he's about diving into a team fight and absolute zeroing them to death and then spamming the Nunu laugh emote. Unfortunately, that's kind of inevitable. Oh, this is Nunu's old lore. I actually didn't want to talk about that one so much. But yeah, I mean, as a character, Nunu is fascinating to me. He represents something that's very rare in video games. He's a fantasy that's very rare. And his character design is, I think, on the simpler side. I really don't think they went too hard on anything. By the way, something I should have mentioned. One of the things that ties Nunu to the Sami people of Finland is that the Sami people, or the Sami, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, are herders. They drive around herds of reindeer. And they, by the way, are at the core of a lot of the old myths we have about Santa. And the horns that Willump has on his head right now, to me, more than anything, they look like reindeer horns. I thought that was just kind of a neat little reference. Nunu is a simple design, very simplistic. Something I talked about in the comparison video is that Nunu has 6 limbs specifically to make him a magical creature, but also because that's the kind of thing a child would do when imagining an imaginary friend, is to, I have a giant friend, he's like a bear, but he's also like a cat, and he's also like a lion, and he's got horns, and he's got 6 arms, and he's got big round claws, and he's got big fur, and he's big, and he's soft, and he's cool, and he's fun, and he has glowing tattoos. Like, all of this comes out of a sort of childish imagination aesthetic, and that means the character design in a lot of ways is kind of a little bit messy and a little bit simple. Like I said, he's got a lion face, he's got antlers, he's got these pointy ears, he's got these big bushy mane, he's got 6 limbs and a body like some weird combination of a bear and a teddy bear. All of that is a little bit messy, but all of it makes sense when you understand that what he's supposed to be more than anything else is Nunu's great big imaginary friend, except Nunu has powerful magic in him, and so his imaginary friend becomes very, very real and can eat you alive if he needs to, because he is the big teddy bear protecting Nunu from the worst of the nightmares while helping him grow up into a fine young man, as it were. Which is something else that I could spend a whole lot of time talking about, the ways in which Willump is ultimately going to have to act like a big brother, but also kind of like a parental figure to Nunu. And that's something I really, really hope they explore in future lore, is the ways in which Willump is carefully shielding Nunu from some of the more disturbing truths about the Freljord. Like, Nunu doesn't know about the Watchers in the Deep. He doesn't know about the coming of the Void. He doesn't know about any of those things. He doesn't know just how brutal the Winter's Claw can really be. He doesn't understand these things yet. And as far as I can make out from the way the stories are being told, that's one of the things that Willump does, is kind of, let's leave some of those terrible things for the future when you're a little bit more grown and you've had some more time to gain some experience of the world, and for now we'll just have fun adventures. And I'll protect you from the worst of it, and slowly, eventually Nunu is going to have to grow up, which is also something that's very much part of childish fantasy. It's something that kind of annoyed me at first, when I realized how much of the fantasy is kind of tied up in the idea that Nunu is eventually going to have to grow up and face the world, that he's eventually going to have to grow out of his childishness a little bit, because there is terrible dark things on the horizon in League of Legends that he's gonna be a big part of dealing with. Like, that's certainly what both Lysandra and Willump seems to think, is that the magic that Nunu has been given is powerful enough that it can make a real difference against the Watchers when they come. So presumably, like most of the rest of the Freljord, he's gonna eventually be tied to that storyline. But not yet. But that's also something that's an important part of childish fantasies, is this slight tinge of melancholy that someday you do have to put away childish things a little bit. Someday you do have to grow up a little bit. And the tension for Nunu specifically is how much he can hold on to those amazing qualities that he has as a child that makes him the perfect receptacle for all this magic and power, without letting it be tarnished, without letting it become corrupted as he grows up and as he has to use his power for other things and fun adventures with friends. And that's when or if Riot ever follow up on Nunu's storylines, that's the kind of thing I'd love to see them explore. Anyway, I think I've talked for long enough about. I really, if in case you can't tell, I really like the new Nunu and Willump. I really like them. They're a really good character design. They're really interesting. They have a lot more to say thematically than the old version, and they have a lot to say about thematically expanding what the Freljord can be beyond kind of brutalist Viking fantasy. I really hope he gets to meet Braum someday. That would be nice. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, there's a like button down below. I recommend and I encourage you with all of my childish heart to use it. You can also hit the subscribe button if you are so inclined. That's also helpful. There's also a bell icon next to the subscribe button, which I'm sure you already know you have to click on in order to actually subscribe. Because if you just click the subscribe button, maybe you don't get subscribed. I don't know. What else? I think there's something else I'm missing. By the way, Patreon. I do have a Patreon, which if you have a dollar that you don't need and you don't mind me spending that dollar on, food and things so I can make videos, then I'd be very grateful for the help. But if you can't, if you're not able to, by the way, I've gotten a few messages about this, and I get them every once in a while from people apologizing for not supporting the Patreon. I would like to just, don't apologize for that. Like, it's fine. It's there for people who have an extra dollar, like that they can part with, and it doesn't matter to them, it doesn't hurt them, or it's not a trouble for them. It's for them. If all you can do is watch the videos, then I'm grateful. That's more than enough. Don't worry about it. It's okay. Don't feel pressured, please, for the love of God. If you didn't like this video, I mean, it's 35 minutes long at this point, so I'm surprised you're still here, but there is a dislike button down below. Now, as the story goes, once long ago, the dislike button was actually, well, a like button. And it was just kind of going through life, expecting to grow up into being a full-fledged like button on YouTube like all of its brothers and sisters. But, as it grew up and as it went to like button school and incurred all these terrible student debts, it kind of began to feel this discontent in its soul. It started to feel like maybe a like button wasn't really what it was cut out to be. But at this point, it had been so long. It had spent all this time learning to be a like button like all the rest. All its friends were like buttons, and it began to feel very lonely, to just be kind of set on this path with no opportunity to ever really go anywhere. And it all kind of came to a head at the end of its college years, when it was about to really get its degree, when it looked down at all of the homework and all of the stuff that spent, and all the time it had spent, and all of the years that had gone into chasing this dream that had never really been its own, and finally realized that, I'm not a like button. This isn't me. This is not what I'm cut out to be. I went on this path because I thought it was the only one available to me, but what if there's more out there? What if there's something else? And so it dropped out of like button school. It went on the road. It abandoned its house. It just took along what it had to carry and converted it all into money and hitchhiked its way across the world. And it saw things, and it met people, and it understood. Holy shit, most people are assholes. And so it made a career decision to become a dislike button, and it has been very happy ever since. So if you feel the need to click on the dislike button, I'm sure it will appreciate your patronage, although I would certainly prefer the click on the like button. Thank you for sticking through this very long and involved story. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.